Kona, a classic of comics. Thank you, Chip, for being here.
I found that deeply, deeply disturbing.
Why?
It was sort of like Don DeLillo wrote it when he was 9.
There's nothing better than overheated prose and really scratched out drawing in comics. I can't get enough of it.
And a hero who has the name of a brand of coffee.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I guess the overwhelming question to lead with is, where do you find this shit?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. The shit is found in many different places. It's culled from my own collection of many years standing. It is suggested to me by friends. For example, Kona was suggested to me by a friend who knows my taste. I'd never heard of it before a couple years ago, and a guy named Jason Miles suggested it. And, of course, I immediately fell in love. Bought all 18 issues, read them all in one day on the floor, sitting on the floor, happy as a pig in shit, reading my beloved Kona. And other artists. I mean, Art Out of Time was very much informed by guys like Seth or Jaime Hernandez, Mark Newgarden. Reading interviews with artists is sort of one of the best ways to do history, because you realize that artists, particularly cartoonists, have really invented their own history, and it's a history very much apart from what's been written so far. So it's a combination of all those things. And then, well, it's time to go. Thank you. That stuff, and going to, just like you, going to comic conventions, going through back issue bins.
Going back to Kona, so there's 18 issues?
Yeah.
And does this ever end, or did they just run out of funding?
It's a mix of both. The great thing about Kona is that each issue, this I do think is the best issue, but they're all pretty much almost as good.
I don't know if good is the operative word. Interesting.
Good. So good.
Okay.
Interesting, too. Yeah, it's one continuing story for the entire thing. And eventually Glanzman left. They replaced him, and it ran out of steam. And then Dell, eventually in the late 60s, just kind of collapsed. But Dell, if you're looking for some fun comics, Dell in the 60s, when they were really in dire straits, they put out Dracula as a superhero, which is awesome.
I do remember that.
Neutro, the atomic bomb robot man, is a good one. There are many. You could fill a whole other book. I'll be pitching that tomorrow. Loser superheroes and their friends.
But going back to Kona, at the end, is there an end, or does it just stop?
It just stops. Just stops. You don't really know what happens to Kona, but
what about the family?
They never really. You don't really know. It's sad. It's like watching Lost and then never getting to the end, which maybe will happen anyway.
Right. It sounds like it's going to.
Yeah. Last night was Mother Earth. Anybody see it? It's pretty good.
I don't have the Lost gene. I don't know why. I'm saving it for my retirement.
Yeah.
Get all of them and just watch them. You have stories in here, as you said, by guys who either went on to do much more famous characters or did the more famous characters first. Like the Wonder Woman artist is of particular interest.
H.G. Peter.
H.G. Peter.
Yeah.
And what was that story? Did he do Wonder Woman before he did the story that's in your book?
H.G. Peter's a curious guy. His earliest work dates to 1906 for Life magazine. He claimed to have ghosted on Mud and Jeff, and then he kind of appears again in New York in the late 30s doing kind of random comic book work for hire. He started Man O' Metal at the same time he started Wonder Woman. It's simultaneous. So Wonder Woman started in 1941, and he was the first artist and the co-designer of the character, and he was doing Man O' Metal at the same time, but much more. I mean, Wonder Woman's an amazing, amazing comic, those first 10 years. And it's all sorts of bondage and S&M stuff built into it intentionally. But H.G. Peter really became unhinged with Man of Metal, I'd say.
Again, was he writing that and drawing it?
Yes, that he was writing and
because
drawing.
that would be the big difference. Because what's his name? Marston. Had the whole bondage fetish.
Yeah.
And the multiple wives and the God knows what else. That sort of, there it is in Wonder Woman. The thing about the Man of Metal story in your book is that I would say the woman quotient is rather absent.
There are no women in Man o' Metal.
Exactly.
Just Man o' Metal.
There are Man of Metal in this story. Let me tell you something.
Yeah, it's worth picking up.
It's something.
For that alone. There's bursting Man o' Metal.
Lock the door when you read it. Because you don't want anyone intruding. Quite amazing. And I did a whole book on Wonder Woman, but I hadn't, I was focused on Wonder Woman, and I wasn't looking at what else this guy would have done. Was Man o' Metal the end of the line for him? Was Wonder Woman the end of the line for him?
Man o' Metal continued for a couple years, and it tapered off, and then it was just Wonder Woman. He did a couple fill-in features here and there, but Wonder Woman became quite an industry, and he stayed on the feature until 1958.
Really?
Or 58, yeah, and then he died.
God,
he quit, and then he died.
I should know that. That's really embarrassing.
So that he had a whole studio going, doing Wonder Woman, and I think when it became such a big hit, I mean, it was all-consuming. But man, Wonder Woman, that is a strange comic. It got very blanded, but I guess that happened with a lot of comics, but it was deeply odd. And so was H.G. Peter. I mean, the drawings the only unpublished drawings I've seen are similarly strange. There's some great ones of Wonder Woman in various outfits, and then just some loose sketches that are kind of Victorian and beautiful.
The stories in Art in Time, and by the way, Art Out of both these books are great, and Art Out of Time is truly amazing because this stuff is older. You go up to 1980 with this, and so as comics are evolving, I would posit that they are becoming more self-aware. And how then what was your criteria to find something from like 1980 that, I don't know, was earnest and naive and the stuff from the later stuff in the book is all underground. The 1980 stuff is Crystal Night by Sharon Rudahl and a couple of Michael McMillan stories, and they were both underground artists, but they were underground artists who approached the medium without the baggage that like Crumb had, or some of these guys that were sort of making comics about comics. They were really approaching it as the best way they could think of to tell these stories. So there is an earnestness to it, absolutely. And the criteria was that, one, they had to be overlooked even for an underground artist, which is like 3 layers underground. And it had to fall into the category of adventure. And I wasn't interested in this sort of crime type stuff that the underground guys were doing that was taking off on EC Comics. I was interested in people that were trying to tell adventure stories, doing it earnestly, and doing it with a level of conceptual proficiency that's actually unusual for underground comics of the time. Like Sharon Rudahl's Crystal Night is this incredible Crystal Knock parable, but it's done as sort of a Philip K. Dick influenced feminist sci-fi story. That's pretty epic, and of course, as a woman in the underground, she was naturally, Is she still working?
She is working. She just did a biography of Emma Goldman a few years ago that came out from, I think, the Free Press, maybe. She does some nonfiction graphic novel stuff, but that was after a long break. After Crystal Night, it was like 20 years. Yeah.
This is a sort of boring, pragmatic question, but as a publisher, editor, whatever, myself, was this a rights and permissions nightmare? I mean, how did that work?
It wasn't. It was surprisingly easy. Marvel gave permission for the stories I included that they published.
And what were the Marvel stories? Sorry.
Two Matt Fox stories. Matt Fox was a very odd pulp-influenced horror artist of the 50s, and Bill Everett, who created the Submariner and did incredible fantasy stories for Marvel in the 50s. And otherwise, a lot of the stuff is in the public domain. The underground guys were still alive, and they gave permission. And everything else, I contacted the families or the estates, and either they didn't respond because they weren't interested, or it was just in the public domain. I mean, there's an unbelievable amount of comics that is rights free.
Rights free?
Yeah.
So is there another volume of this that you want to do?
I don't have one in mind right now. I mean, the funny thing about publishing anthologies about comics history right now is that, as opposed to like in 2005 when I started working on Art Out of Time, is that there's so many. There's a lot of books collecting old comics these days. So even doing Art in Time, I started it, and halfway through it kind of realized, shit, like there's a lot of there are artists in there that I took out because suddenly they had their own books. So I don't have one in mind right now. The stuff I want to work on, comics related, is maybe some long form prose about comics, maybe a biography or something. But right now, I mean, there's a fantasy I have about some related projects, but they're so obscure that it would be like, I don't know, man. Yeah.
Embarrassing moment of earnestness, I should say. This is our Johnny Carson moment. Dan started and runs the publisher Picture Box, which is a truly astonishing comics publisher, and I urge you all to check it out because it's amazing stuff. How do you? The Picture Box is like living artists that you work with.
Yeah.
How do you decide who to publish, and how do you find them?
Picture Box has sort of started the comics end of it, because it's part art, part some design books, and then comics. Comics end of it is really rooted in discoveries about 5 or 6 years ago. A bunch of artists who came out of Providence, Rhode Island, loosely arranged around an art collective called Fort Thunder. Matt Brinkman, CF, Brian Chippendale, and Paper Rad. And these guys are producing comics that are deeply rooted in genre, actually, but are incredibly conceptually astute and beautifully drawn, and underground in a way. Those are the artists of my generation. Like when I first saw their stuff, it just felt like when I first saw Fort Thunder stuff, I thought, oh, well, these are the comics that are made for me, and nobody was publishing them, and that's kind of how it started. And I've stuck with them. I mean, I'm a teeny little publisher, so I kind of have this core group of artists, and I'm not really out there looking for anybody. It's just publishing their output, making sure everything gets out, and each of them puts out a book a year or a book every 2 years, so that's enough.
That's a lot.
And they're in mini comics and prints, and they all do a million different things. So it's enough keeping up with them, and I feel like it's a